This morning, we continue our summer sermon series on the parables of Jesus, looking at a parable from the Gospel of Luke that is, at first reading, a confusing story about money management. But as we look at it deeper, as with so many of the parables, we find that there are many layers of meaning that may speak to us even now. Our second reading is Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 9. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an account of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this parable we just heard, which is usually known as the parable of the dishonest manager, is problematic and confusing. Is Jesus really telling us to be dishonest with our wealth? To be shrewd in our dealings with those who owe us something? The story is primarily about two people, a master and his account manager. The master is a wealthy landowner, and he hears through the grapevine, presumably, that his account manager, his bookkeeper, his steward, the one who speaks and negotiates on his behalf, is being dishonest in his keeping of the books. The master confronts the manager, who has nothing to say in his own defense. So the master fires him on the spot and sends him to get the books and return them. Now, as with us now, back then there were two steps to being fired. First, there is a private firing, where the only people who know that this has taken place are the one who has been fired and the one who did the firing, presumably a boss or supervisor. At some point later, the firing would become public. The manager's colleagues would find out, then his family, and then his whole community. What the manager in this parable does is to take advantage of that time in between the private firing and when that firing has become public. The boss has sent him to go and retrieve the books. The manager does this, but on the way, he is his usual dishonest, scheming self. He knows he's not cut out for manual labor, and he has too much pride to beg, so he comes up with a plan. Before the master's debtors know that the manager no longer has the authority to speak for the master, he's going to cook the books one more time, this time by reducing what the people owe. So he sends for a few of the debtors, and then he meets with them in private rather than just as a group. The group would have been faster, but meeting with them in private was intentional, because then nobody can really prove what happens at the meeting. It's one person's word against another. Then he tells the debtors that if they want their debts reduced, they have to write the reduction in their own hand. Again, an intentional and shrewd decision, because if it was in the manager's hand, the master could just say, "Well, you're dishonest anyway. I don't have to take that seriously. You had no authority to reduce those debts." But the debtors can say, "We had no idea he could no longer speak on your behalf." And so now they honor and regard this master with great affection because he has reduced their debts. The most important thing for us to realize in this story is that the manager's whole scheme is predicated on a complimentary view of his master. He takes a huge gamble that if he presents the master as being generous enough to significantly reduce the debts people owe, the master will not object. Think about it. If the master comes back to the debtors and says, no, your debts are not reduced. They are what they have always been. I'm changing the numbers back. Imagine how he would look to that community. Cruel and exacting, especially when the community is already celebrating the reduction of their debts. So what choice does the master have but to compliment the shrewdness of his manager? As one commentator writes, the parable is a Tom and Jerry story. The little mouse matches wits with the big cat and wins. The parable is built on the psychology of an oppressed peasantry, such as is known to have existed at the time of Jesus. The manager is a Robin Hood figure, a countercultural hero. But at the end of the story, Jesus calls him a son of this age. He is smart enough to know that his only hope is to put his entire trust in the unqualified mercy of his generous master. His morals are deplorable. Nonetheless, Jesus wants the sons of light, us, to use their intelligence like the dishonest steward and to trust completely in the mercy of God for their salvation. God knows we are all way too good at accounting. In fact, what this parable seems to be telling us is that most of us are much better accountants than God is. We are in the habit of keeping score, not just when it comes to our bank accounts, but perhaps even more so in our relationships with the people with whom we interact regularly, our family, our friends, our coworkers, even strangers. We are especially good at accounting when we feel that someone owes us something or has wronged us in some way. With this parable, Jesus is telling his followers that it might be time to loosen our grip, to look away from the bottom line, to stop keeping score for a little while, and to take a gamble on the generosity of God in just the way the manager gambled on the generosity of his master. Can you imagine a place in your life that might look different if you believe that God's generosity and mercy can actually change hearts and minds, including yours? Maybe it's a relationship with someone you love but haven't been able to forgive, so the two of you have been stuck in a pattern of blame and resentment and snarkiness or just silence for years or even decades. Maybe it's a situation at work where you feel frustrated and trapped. Maybe there are younger employees who aren't interested in hearing your advice because they think their new way of doing things is much better than any wisdom you have gained in your years of experience. Maybe it's an illness or an addiction that you never saw coming, but that has now taken over and seems to define you. For the past few days, the place I have been trying to believe in the power of God's generosity and mercy is Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, where last week 21-year-old Dylan Roof joined a Wednesday night Bible study and prayer circle, and at the end of it shot and killed 9 people because of the color of their skin. Mother Emanuel is a historic downtown church, not unlike ours, but it has a remarkable past. It's the oldest AME church in the South and the 3rd oldest in the world. Founded nearly 200 years ago by Black men determined to gain their freedom, or at the very least, their freedom to worship. It was burned not long after many of those men were executed, after they were caught planning a slave revolt. The congregation met in secret for decades until slavery ended, and then they finally built a new sanctuary in 1891. Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King Jr., and Coretta Scott King have all spoken there. What happened this week at that church is almost unspeakable. Again and again, we wake up to the news of these angry, sick people with guns who do horrific things, motivated by hate and often by racism. It opens all kinds of old wounds: Columbine, Newtown, Fort Hood, Chardon, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray. The list goes on and on and on. As President Obama reminded us when he spoke on Thursday, this is the 14th time in his presidency he has had to speak after an event like this. I don't know if you saw him speak, but he looked tired. We are all tired. And just when we think we've seen the worst, a new version presents itself and makes us ask, how is this possible? Who would do something like this? And for people of faith, for us, to imagine someone not just taking a gun into a church, but being welcomed into a Bible study, into the sacred circle of prayer, and then opening fire. It is not only inexplicable, it is terrifyingly personal. Where in the world do we locate God's generosity and mercy in these events? What does it look like for us to gamble on God when we confront them? Well, Stephen Singleton can show us what it looks like. The former pastor of the Mother Emanuel Church was interviewed on Thursday. He personally knew 7 of the 9 people who were killed on Wednesday night. How easy would it be for him, for any of us pushed to the limits of our own capacity for understanding and mercy, to just get angry, to want to fight fire with fire, to divide instead of unite? But here's what Stephen Singleton said: we are people of faith. And people of faith know that we heal. God helps us to heal. This doesn't drive us away from God. This drives us to God. If we get bitter and angry, we just make a bad situation worse. The family members of the Mother Emanuel victims can show how to gamble on God's generosity and mercy too. At Dylan Roof's bond hearing on Friday, several family members had the opportunity to address him. The New York Times reported that it was as if the Bible study had never ended, as one after another victims' family members offered lessons in forgiveness, testaments to a faith that is not compromised by violence or grief. We welcomed you Wednesday night into our Bible study with open arms, said Felicia Sanders, the mother of 26-year-old Tawanza Sanders, a poet who died after trying to save his aunt, who was also killed. You have killed some of the most beautiful people I know, she said in a quavering voice. Every fiber in my body hurts, and I will never be the same. Tawanza Sanders is my son, but Tawanza was my hero. Tawanza was my hero. But as we say in Bible study, we enjoyed you, but may God have mercy on you. I acknowledge that I am very angry, said a sister of one of the victims. But my sister taught me that we are a family that love built. We have no room for hating. I will never be able to hold her again, but I forgive you, a daughter of Ethel Lance said, and have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people, but God forgives you, and I forgive you. That is what it looks like to gamble on the generosity and mercy of God. That is what it looks like to look at the books and add up the numbers and see what we are owed, and then cross off the total and lower the debt, trusting and hoping that the promises of God's generosity, God's mercy, God's grace, God's messed up style of accounting are indeed true. That is what it looks like to follow Christ's example of self-giving love. At the end of the story Jesus tells, he says to his disciples, "Make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes." Jesus knows that the only lasting thing in this life is our relationships with others. It is not wealth or material possessions. Invest yourself in relationships, he is saying. Do not count the cost. As Frederick Buechner once wrote, by all the laws of both logic and simple arithmetic, to give yourself away in love to another would seem to mean that you end up with less of yourself than you had to begin with. But the miracle is that just the reverse is true. Logic and arithmetic be damned. To give yourself away in love to somebody else is to become, for the first time, yourself fully. To not just live for yourself anymore is a new way to come fully alive. Things needn't have been that way as far as we know, but that is the way things are. That is the way life is. And if you and I are inclined to have any doubts about it, we can always put it to the test. The test, needless to say, is our lives themselves. When the dishonest manager cooked his master's books that one last time, he put his master's generosity to the test. He was almost positive that his master was the kind of person who would allow the new debts to stand, but it was a big risk. When we gamble on the generosity and mercy of God in ways that matter, it requires us to risk, to let go of whatever gives us a sense of order and security. Gambling on God's generosity and mercy requires us to be bad accountants, to let go of the debts other people owe us, to give ourselves away in love. On Thursday this week, I got an email from a man who lives in New Jersey, but has been coming up here to the Seidman Cancer Center to visit a loved one in treatment. He said that the church for him has been a place of sanctuary, and he hoped that the events in Charleston would not lead us to lock up our church. For us as a church, to gamble on the generosity of God's love and mercy, to give ourselves away in love, means that even after what happened in Charleston, we will continue to open our doors every day so that anyone can come into this sanctuary for solace and prayer. It means we will continue to welcome any person, friend or stranger, of any race or religion or political persuasion into our weekly Bible study and prayer time. It means we will work to understand and be in conversation with those who are different from us. It means we will pray for the families of victims and the perpetrators of these crimes alike. It means we will trust that the God we worship, the Savior we follow, is with the victims in Charleston, the families and friends they left behind, is with us and is with everyone, in life and death, and in life beyond death. What would our world look like if we all took a gamble on that? Amen.